She had the ticket. She had the seat. She had the right. But when Dr. Eleanor Brooks stepped up to the velvet ropes of the VIP lounge, the words she heard were sharp and cold. Not today. Not for you. Was it a mistake? A policy glitch? Or was it something uglier, written deep into the way this system worked? In that moment, the humiliation wasn't just personal. It was public. The eyes of strangers followed her. Some shook their heads. Some pulled out phones. The message was clear. You don't belong here. Yet what no one realized, what even the staff blocking her path couldn't imagine, was that within 12 hours, this very airline would be forced to answer to her. Policies would fall. Careers would end. And an empire that had dismissed her would discover it now belonged in part to her. History doesn't always shift in courtrooms or elections. Sometimes it shifts in an airport lounge, with a woman who refuses to bow her head. Where are you listening to this story from? Drop it in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe now so you never miss the next one. Now, let's begin. Ma'am, you can't come in here. This lounge is for our premium passengers only. The words landed like a slap across the polished marble floor of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. The attendant behind the counter, a young woman with a perfectly pressed uniform and a thin smile that never reached her eyes, stepped squarely in front of the glass doors. Her tone was polite enough to fool anyone who wasn't paying attention, but the implication was sharp and unmistakable. You don't belong here. Dr. Eleanor Brooks shifted her leather carry-on to the other shoulder. She had just walked 4 gates in sensible black heels, her wool shawl still carrying the chill of early morning. She wasn't dressed to impress. No flashy jewelry, no designer logos. Just a crisp black dress, her silver hair pulled back neatly, and the quiet confidence of a woman who'd spent 30 years negotiating boardrooms. Still, she felt the sting. I believe my boarding pass covers entry, Eleanor said evenly, offering the attendant her phone. The digital screen glowed with the words every frequent traveler knew. First class. Priority access. Atlantic Airways. The attendant's smile tightened further. She didn't scan the code. She barely glanced at it. Madam, our list doesn't show your name. Perhaps you're mistaken. The economy lounge is down the hall. A few passengers waiting inside the frosted glass walls looked up. One raised an eyebrow. Another lowered his newspaper just enough to get a good look at her before returning to his coffee. A group of college students sitting on the carpeted floor outside began to whisper, their phones already angled like periscopes. Eleanor inhaled slowly. She had been here before, in different forms. The raised eyebrow when she walked into a high-end store. The double check of her ID at a hotel desk. The startled expression when she sat down at a head table. Always the same question behind their eyes. What are you doing here? She pressed the phone closer. Scan it, please. My flight leaves in less than 2 hours. The attendant leaned forward, her voice dropping into a practiced tone of authority. We have to verify all first-class passengers carefully. I'll need a government ID as well. Eleanor pulled her passport from her bag without hesitation. The gold emblem on the navy cover caught the overhead lights as she set it on the counter. Here you go. The woman flipped it open with exaggerated precision, studying the picture, then Eleanor's face, then back to the picture. She murmured, as though something didn't quite add up. Behind her, a businessman in a tailored gray suit rolled his suitcase to the door. The attendant's face brightened instantly. Welcome back, Mr. Hayes. Right this way. The scanner beeped once, and he was inside. No passport, no questions. Eleanor felt the weight of silence settling on her shoulders. Passengers who pretended not to notice were still watching, still recording. One young woman whispered to her friend, "She doesn't look like first class." The attendant pushed the passport back across the counter. Ma'am, your ticket may have been issued incorrectly. These mistakes happen sometimes. I'll ask you to step aside so others may pass. Eleanor placed the passport neatly back in her bag. Her jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. The only mistake here is your assumption. Please check your system again. The woman crossed her arms. "I've checked twice. You're not in the list. Do you want to sit in economy or not travel at all today?" A hush fell. A man with a camera bag muttered, "She's going viral already." Eleanor did not raise her voice. She did not plead. She simply adjusted the strap of her bag, looked past the attendant into the lounge rows of leather chairs, soft lighting, trays of fruit and champagne, and said quietly, "You're making a serious error." At that moment, her phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen. "Boardroom ready. They're waiting for you." Eleanor closed her hand around the phone before anyone else could see, her face unreadable. She stepped back, giving the attendant a final measured look, then turned slightly toward the growing audience of onlookers. Phones hovered like dragonflies. Whispers rippled. The woman at the desk folded her arms, certain she had put Eleanor in her place. But Eleanor knew something no one else in that lounge understood yet. This was not the end of the story. This was the beginning. And in less than 12 hours, the same airline that had just dismissed her would belong in part to her. The glass doors hissed shut behind Eleanor as she stepped back into the terminal concourse. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't demanded anything more than what she was owed. And still, she'd been turned away like an uninvited guest at her own dinner table. Around her, the airport hummed the way only Atlanta could on a Friday afternoon, rolling suitcases clicking against tile, flight announcements echoing, children crying over spilled sodas. Yet in the space she left behind, a pocket of silence had stretched thin and brittle. People noticed when a black woman stood her ground. People noticed when she didn't fit their mental picture of first class. Two young men leaning against a wall angled their phones after her. One whispered, "She looked familiar, right? Like, from somewhere?" His friend shook his head. "Nah, she's probably some wannabe. If she was somebody, they'd have let her in." Still, he didn't stop recording. Eleanor walked with purpose, her heels making soft taps on the marble floor. She stopped by a window, overlooking the runway, letting the light stream across her face. The shawl draped over her shoulders gave her the look of someone's aunt headed to a funeral plane, unremarkable. And yet, passengers drifting past gave her second glances, the kind reserved for unsolved puzzles. Her phone vibrated again. A single line, conference room secured, documents waiting. She swiped it away before anyone could notice. Behind her, voices rose. The lounge attendant had returned to her desk, whispering to a supervisor who had come to check the commotion. "She insisted she belonged here. I checked 3 times. She's not on the list." The supervisor frowned, scanning the hall as though Eleanor might still be lingering. His voice carried farther than he meant. People like that always think rules don't apply. A middle-aged black couple passing by stiffened at the words. The wife pulled her husband's arm. "You hear that? Same script. Every time." He nodded but kept walking. Inside the lounge, a businessman with salt and pepper hair leaned toward his seatmate. She handled it too calmly. Most people would have made a scene. The seatmate shrugged. Maybe she's embarrassed. But his eyes stayed fixed on the spot where Eleanor had stood. Eleanor adjusted her bag and moved toward a quiet seating area near Gate 17. She lowered herself into a chair, back straight, legs crossed at the ankle. She wasn't going to disappear. Not yet. A teenage girl 2 rows over whispered to her mother, "Mom, I saw her picture online last month. Remember that article about women CEOs? She looks just like the one they interviewed." Her mother glanced once, dismissed the thought, and replied, "Honey, if she was a CEO, she wouldn't be sitting here." Eleanor pulled out a small leather notebook. She clicked her pen and began writing, slowly, methodically, as though noting the weather. But her words were sharp. Dates, names, locations. Everything that had just happened would live beyond this lounge, beyond this airport. The notebook snapped shut. Her phone buzzed again. and this time she answered. She turned slightly toward the window, her voice calm, almost casual. Yes. Proceed as planned. Double the review on the acquisition files. No delays. Anyone watching would think she was discussing luggage, but the man sitting 2 seats away froze, mid-sip of his coffee. Acquisition? His eyes darted to her bag, to her notebook, then back to her face. She didn't acknowledge him. She ended the call quickly, her tone final. The man shifted uneasily, typing something into his own phone. A text shot off to a friend. Woman in airport, talking about acquisitions. Black, mid-50s. Dressed down, but serious. Maybe someone big? Near the duty-free store, the pair of young men who had been filming replayed their video, zooming in on Eleanor's face. One muttered, "Hold up. That is her. That's Dr. Brooks. My uncle sent me her TED Talk once." His friend scoffed, but the first one kept scrolling, pulling up an image search. The resemblance was too close to ignore. Back in the lounge, whispers had spread among passengers. A woman with red lipstick whispered. She wasn't flustered at all, almost like she was waiting for them to say no. Another added, "Strange. She checked her watch like she had somewhere more important to be than this." Security strolled through, casual but alert. They scanned the concourse, eyes flicking from Eleanor to the clusters of onlookers. No one stopped her. She looked like just another traveler. Yet the unease was palpable. Something about her presence shifted the air. Eleanor sat perfectly still, eyes on the runway, as though she were simply admiring the departing planes. But her phone buzzed again, one line flashing bright before she closed it. Shareholders assembled, awaiting your signal. The world around her carried on children tugging suitcases, gate calls blaring. And yet, threads of rumor stitched themselves into the air. Who was this woman? Why did she take notes, like a lawyer preparing for trial? Why did she speak with the calm finality of someone used to being obeyed? The whispers would only grow louder. Because Eleanor Brooks wasn't just waiting for her flight. She was waiting for her moment. And the airline had no idea how close it was to belonging to her. By late afternoon, the terminal had turned restless. Travelers shuffled in long boarding lines, voices rising over the distorted announcements. The buzz of phones never stopped, notifications, texts, flight alerts, all blending into the white noise of travel. Yet in one pocket of the concourse, the tension around Eleanor had thickened like storm air before rain. She sat with her back straight against a leather chair near gate 17, her shawl drawn neatly across her shoulders. Calm, composed, a quiet center in a swirl of movement. To most people, she still looked like someone's aunt headed to visit family, perhaps even out of place among the business suits and laptops. But the longer she stayed seated, the more obvious it became that people were watching. A college student 2 rows away whispered to his friend, "She hasn't moved in half an hour. She just sits there writing stuff down." His friend shrugged. "Yeah. But did you hear her on the phone? She said something about acquisitions. That's not normal passenger talk." The first boy smirked, holding up his phone. "I recorded it. My brother's gonna flip when I tell him. He's an econ major. He knows all those corporate names." Eleanor ignored them. She pulled her phone from her bag and tapped a number from memory. The line connected immediately. She lowered her voice, but her words cut clear in the hush between boarding calls. "Yes, move forward with the offer. No, don't wait for final clearance. I want the purchase executed before closing bell. Double-check the stock transfer. By the time I land, it should be complete." Her words dropped like stones in water, rippling outward. The businessman across from her coughed into his hand, his eyes flicking from his laptop screen to her. A woman passing by slowed her steps, pretending to rummage in her purse while eavesdropping. Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. She closed her notebook over the screen of her phone, concealing the faint glow, and added, "Yes, Make sure the board has the amended clause. They'll need it in session tonight. I'll handle the public piece when the timing is right." The conversation ended with a single tap. Eleanor slipped the phone into her bag as if nothing had happened. But the atmosphere had shifted. A security officer strolling past slowed when he noticed the cluster of people watching her. He scanned her face, then moved on, but not without a second glance. The businessman leaned forward, finally, unable to help himself. "Excuse me, ma'am. Forgive me for asking. But are you someone important?" Eleanor's eyes met his, calm and steady. "Important to whom?" he stammered. "I just overheard. You sounded like—" He trailed off, embarrassed. She gave the faintest smile. Not warm, not cold, just enough to close the conversation. Everyone sounds like something when they're handling business. He sat back, but unease lingered. He typed furiously on his laptop, pulling up search results, scanning photos, comparing them to the woman seated across from him. His lips moved silently as he read. Then his face drained of color. Across the aisle, the teenage girl who had earlier whispered to her mother now clutched her phone. On the screen glowed a Wikipedia entry, the image unmistakable. Silver hair, same cheekbones, same poised expression. Her mother leaned in, eyes widening. "Dr. Eleanor Brooks, CEO of Brooks Capital." The girl whispered, "Mom, that's her. I knew it." Within minutes, murmurs ran like currents through the waiting area. "It's her. I think it's really her. The investment lady. The billionaire." Passengers leaned toward one another. Phones held low but recording all the same. Inside the VIP lounge, the supervisor who had dismissed her earlier leaned toward the attendant. "Why is she still out there? I told her to leave." The attendant glanced nervously through the glass, noticing the phones, the way heads turned toward Eleanor. "Maybe she really is somebody," she muttered. "Don't be ridiculous," the supervisor snapped. "If she were, we'd know." But at that moment, Eleanor's phone vibrated again. She opened it briefly, just enough for the teenager to catch a glimpse of the glowing words before she quickly closed it. The girl's breath caught. "Boardroom assembled. The conference call begins in 20 minutes. The teen's fingers flew across her screen, updating her followers. "There's a woman here, pretty sure she's Eleanor Brooks, the finance CEO. She just got a message about a boardroom session." Comments flooded in instantly. "No way. Pics or it didn't happen. If that's true, she's worth billions. Why would she be sitting in the coach?" Eleanor crossed her legs neatly at the ankle and folded her hands in her lap. She did not acknowledge the cameras, the whispers, the shifting gazes. She sat in quiet authority, as though the terminal were just another boardroom, and the gathering of strangers, another audience waiting for her cue. The businessman closed his laptop with a snap. He stood, suitcase in hand, and walked swiftly toward the lounge supervisor. His voice carried, "Do you realize who you just turned away?" The supervisor bristled. "A passenger without clearance." The man shook his head in disbelief. "That's Eleanor Brooks. She could buy this airline twice over." The words struck like lightning. The attendant's face was drained of color. The supervisor's jaw went tight. Passengers shifted, eyes widening, phones rising higher. Eleanor stood slowly, adjusting her shawl with deliberate grace. She lifted her phone once more, pressing a number. Her voice carried, low but firm. "This is Brooks. Yes, go ahead. File the disclosure. Tonight, not tomorrow. I'll meet you in conference room A. If anyone questions the timeline, tell them it's already in motion." She ended the call. Around her, silence pressed in, thick with realization. For the first time all afternoon, Eleanor let her gaze sweep across the crowd. Not harsh, not proud, just steady. And in that gaze, the truth settled. She was not just a woman denied a lounge chair. She was the woman who had the power to decide whether the lounge, the airline, the entire system would exist in its current form tomorrow. The whispers were no longer whispers. They had become certainty. And the system that had dismissed her had no idea it had already lost. The airport manager arrived 20 minutes later, a tall man in a navy blazer with a badge clipped neatly to his chest. His stride was sharp, meant to project authority. He found Eleanor seated exactly where she had been, unbothered, her shawl resting lightly across her shoulders. "Ma'am," he began, his voice firm but cautious. "I've been informed of a situation. The lounge staff says there's been some misunderstanding. If you'll follow me, I can reseat you appropriately." Eleanor looked up slowly, her expression calm, almost bored. "Appropriately," she repeated, tasting the word. "And what does that mean?" The manager shifted, caught off guard. "It means, we'll find you a more suitable space to wait for your flight." Across the seating area, passengers leaned forward. Phones were angled discreetly, recording every word. Eleanor uncrossed her legs and stood with deliberate grace. She adjusted the strap of her leather bag, her voice measured. "You've mistaken me for someone here to argue. I'm not here to dispute your rules. I'm here to activate systems already in place." The manager blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Her phone vibrated in her hand. She tapped once, and the screen lit with a series of notifications. She turned it just enough for him to see. Subject lines flashing across the screen. "Emergency session confirmed. Governance vote initiated." "You think I need access to a lounge?" Eleanor continued, her tone low and steady. "What I actually need is compliance from your corporate chain of command." The manager swallowed hard, his practiced authority faltering. "I don't know what you mean." Eleanor's gaze held his until he looked away. "You don't have to know. You only have to watch." She gestured lightly toward his phone, which buzzed at that exact moment. His eyes dropped to the screen. An email banner glowed across the top. "Priority alert. Shareholder review. Pending." Confusion flickered across his face. Around them, murmurs rippled louder. A flight attendant whispering to another, "Something's happening. This doesn't feel like a passenger dispute anymore." The manager cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I'll need to step aside and confirm some things." "You'll want to," Eleanor replied. She settled back into her chair as though it were a throne, her movements precise. "Because in less than an hour, your headquarters will call. And by then, this will no longer be about whether I sit in a lounge. It will be about whether you still hold your job." The manager stiffened. He wanted to protest, but his phone vibrated again. A second alert, then a third. He backed away slowly, muttering something about verifying records, though everyone watching could see the shift. Authority no longer sat with him. Passengers exchanged glances, their eyes wide. A college student whispered, "She's running the show, not them." Eleanor folded her hands neatly in her lap, her face composed. She wasn't gloating, wasn't grandstanding. She was simply letting the system she had set in motion reveal itself. And for the first time, the staff around her began to understand this woman hadn't come to argue. She had come to take control. The first ripple came quietly. A young employee in a crisp uniform stepped out of the lounge, her phone buzzing in her hand. She froze in the doorway, eyes locked on the screen. She mouthed the words silently, "shareholder session," before slipping back inside with her face pale. Moments later, the whispers spread. A man in a blazer leaned toward his companion. "They just announced something internal, some kind of emergency call. Did you see the staff's faces?" His companion nodded, watching Eleanor. "It's her. She's at the center of it." Eleanor remained still, her shawl folded neatly across her lap, her posture unshaken. The world moved around her, suitcases rattling, boarding announcements echoing. But the attention in that corner of the concourse stayed fixed on her. A security officer adjusted his earpiece, his brows pulling tight. "What's going on with this passenger?" "I'm hearing chatter from headquarters." His partner shrugged nervously. Whatever it is, it's bigger than us. Inside the lounge, the supervisor pulled up his email. The subject line glared in red, urgent, confirm presence of Dr. Eleanor Brooks at ATL. His hands trembled slightly as he read the rest. All staff to cooperate fully. Governance instructions incoming. He turned toward the attendant who had denied her. Do you understand who you just refused entry? The young woman shook her head, confused. She didn't look. Exactly, he snapped. And now we all look like fools. Across the glass, passengers were watching this exchange, like spectators at a play. One lifted his phone higher, narrating quietly. The staff are panicking. Something's happening behind those doors. Meanwhile, Eleanor's phone lit again. She read the line without emotion. Vote of control initiated. 27% stake acknowledged. Press release. Drafted. She slipped it back into her bag. The businessman from earlier, still pale, approached cautiously. Dr. Brooks, forgive me for intruding, but is it true? Are you involved with the airline? Her eyes rose to meet his. Involved, she repeated softly. That's one word for it. He stepped back, shaken by the calm certainty in her tone. Around the terminal, little signs of disruption began to show. A gate agent suddenly stood up from her desk, whispering into her headset. Another manager rushed down the concourse, his walk clipped and hurried. The murmurs grew louder. She's someone powerful. Why wouldn't they recognize her? Because they didn't want to. Even without raising her voice, Eleanor's presence was rewriting the script. The staff who once dismissed her were glancing nervously toward her. Passengers who had judged her silently were now watching with something like awe. Inside the lounge, the supervisor's radio crackled. A terse voice ordered, "Do not engage further. Await corporate directive." His eyes flicked toward Eleanor through the glass, then quickly away. She sat unchanged, her gaze steady on the window, where planes lifted into the sky. Yet the effect was clear. The system was bending, the stakes rising, and every person within sight felt the shift. By the time her phone buzzed again, boardroom prepared. You hold the floor, the crowd no longer saw her as a passenger at all. They saw her as something far more unsettling. The woman who had come not to sit, but to turn the entire airline inside out. The terminal felt different now. The hum of rolling luggage and boarding calls was still there, but beneath it ran a quieter rhythm, uneasy, expectant. People who had been content to glance at their phones were now watching Eleanor outright. Even the airport staff who tried to look busy kept darting nervous looks toward her corner. She remained seated, shawl folded perfectly, her notebook balanced on one knee. She was no longer a woman denied a lounge chair. She was the still point in a storm no one else understood. The supervisor, who had mocked her earlier, paced just inside the glass wall of the lounge. He clutched his radio tightly, waiting for instructions that weren't coming fast enough. Every few seconds, his gaze flicked toward Eleanor and then away, like a man staring at a fuse he suspected was already burning. The first strike of thunder came when the overhead monitors flickered. Flight updates scrolled as usual, then paused. A single red banner blinked. Operational delay. Await further notice. Travelers groaned, dragging bags closer, but some noticed the timing. They looked from the screens back to the silver-haired woman sitting in calm silence. A gate agent's headset crackled. She pressed it to her ear, her eyes widening. What? Yes, she's here. Yes, in the concourse. Understood. She set the headset down, with trembling hands. Her voice, a whisper. Headquarters wants a direct line with her. Passengers heard it. Phones lifted higher, recording every fragment. Eleanor finally rose. She did not rush, did not hesitate. She simply stood, gathering her leather bag, her movements deliberate, as if measured against a metronome only she could hear. The simple act made the air thicken. People shifted back instinctively to give her space. The airport manager returned, his face drawn. He forced a tight smile. Dr. Brooks, if you'll come with me, There's a room prepared for a private discussion." Eleanor's reply was soft, but cut through the chatter. "No. Whatever is said will be heard here." The crowd reacted instantly. Gasps, whispers, phones, rising higher. The manager's composure cracked. "Ma'am, this isn't the place." Her voice sharpened just enough to silence him. "This is exactly the place. In the open, with witnesses." The murmurs swelled. Someone whispered, "She's not negotiating. She's dictating." Another phone buzzed in the manager's hand. He glanced down, his color draining as he read. Whatever message had arrived, it stripped him of the last shred of authority. He looked back up at her, lips parted, but no words came. Eleanor set her notebook on the chair she had just vacated. She faced the crowd, her voice steady, deliberate. "For too long, you've operated under the illusion that appearances define worth. That mistake ends today." The words landed heavy, undeniable. Even those who hadn't followed the drama straightened in their seats, sensing the shift. The manager tried again, weakly. "Dr. Brooks, please, this is unnecessary." She cut across him. Quiet, but absolute. "Unnecessary is pretending dignity is negotiable. Beginning today, I am the one who gives orders here." The silence that followed was complete. Not the distracted silence of travel, but the kind that falls when an entire room realizes the ground beneath them has shifted. Cameras recorded. Staff stood frozen. And Eleanor Brooks, calm as ever, had spoken the line that would replay across the world before the night was over. The concourse had transformed into something closer to a theater than a travel hub. What had once been just another Friday afternoon of delayed flights and overpriced coffee now pulsed with a strange electricity, a hush broken only by the clatter of luggage wheels and the buzz of dozens of recording phones. Travelers sat down on their suitcases, as though they'd bought tickets to a show. Parents hushed their children, sensing instinctively that something more important than boarding announcements was unfolding before their eyes. From every angle, phones floated above the crowd like lanterns, their tiny red dots glowing live to audiences far beyond Atlanta. Strangers were already narrating the moment into their microphones, whispering in disbelief, "You're not going to believe this. She just said she owns part of the airline." In living rooms across the country, people who had never set foot in this airport were watching the drama unfold in real time. At the center of it all stood Eleanor Brooks. No microphone, no podium, no stage lights, just the steady confidence of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Her shawl draped across her shoulders like armor. The airport manager hovered a few steps away, pale and restless, his hands twitching at his sides. Behind the glass wall of the VIP lounge, staff clustered like anxious spectators, whispering furiously, their breath fogging the glass as they craned to hear every word. Eleanor reached into her leather bag and withdrew a slim black portfolio. The snap of its clasp echoed louder than the roll of suitcase wheels, louder than the muffled voice of the gate agent announcing pre-boarding for a flight no one cared about anymore. She laid a document across the nearest table with deliberate care. "This," she said, her voice calm, but carrying across the space, "is the ownership clause." The words struck with force, though most in the crowd didn't yet understand what they meant. Silence stretched, broken only by the rustle of paper as she unfolded the first sheet. A notarized record, dense with seals and signatures. The businessman who had hovered nervously earlier leaned closer, his eyes racing across the text. His lips parted. It's a stock purchase agreement," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of realization. Eleanor inclined her head once. "Correct. As of this afternoon, Brooks Capital holds 27% of Atlantic Airways. That makes me the single largest shareholder. Larger, even, than the current board chair." The concourse convulsed in reaction. Gasps rippled like a wave. A woman clutched her chest as if steadying her heart. A college student dropped his backpack with a thud and blurted, "Oh my God, she owns them!" The students filming in the corner shouted to their live stream audience, "You heard that? She owns them! This is crazy!" Eleanor's voice cut through the noise, razor sharp, but never raised, which means that every decision made in this company's name now falls under my review, including the conduct of your staff, including the treatment I received today. Her gaze shifted to the lounge supervisor, who flinched as if a spotlight had landed on him. His jaw clenched, his body stiffened, but his eyes betrayed fear. Inside the lounge, one attendant muttered, "This can't be real." Another shook her head, pointing at the heavy seals on the paper. "Look at the signatures. This is real." Their whispers spilled into the air like confession. Eleanor set down a second document, sliding it forward for all to see. "Here, you'll find the corporate disclosure already filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, effective immediately, public within hours. By tonight, every financial outlet in the country will carry this news." Her words carried the rhythm of inevitability, and the audience could feel it. The air itself seemed to lean toward her, pulled by gravity stronger than authority. The airport manager stammered, his voice suddenly small. "Dr. Brooks, this doesn't change the fact that—" She cut him off, cool and precise. "It changes everything. You dismissed me because you assumed my appearance could not match my access. But appearances don't move markets. Ownership does." The crowd erupted. Murmurs turned into a chorus. "She's right." They turned away their own boss. This is history in the making. Strangers who had never spoken to one another were suddenly united in awe, exchanging looks of disbelief as if to say. Eleanor glanced at her phone. A message glowed. "Emergency board call commencing. CEO Vance on line 1. She slipped the device into her bag without comment, her face unreadable. The businessman who had doubted her earlier now stared at her with reverence. His voice was hushed, almost deferential. "Dr. Brooks, what happens now?" She closed the portfolio gently, her silver hair catching the fluorescent light like strands of steel. "Now," she said, her words measured as a verdict, "the system that thought it could belittle me will answer to me instead." The line carried through the terminal with finality. Even those who didn't understand finance understood power. And they recognized it now, standing in front of them, wrapped not in anger, but in quiet authority. Inside the lounge, the attendant who had blocked her entry earlier sank into a chair, her hands trembling so badly she had to clutch the armrests. Passengers pressed closer to the glass, eager not to miss a word, their breath fogging the pain. The story had crossed from rumor into revelation, and no one could pretend otherwise. Eleanor lifted the portfolio once more, tucking it neatly into her bag. She scanned the concourse, the lifted phones, the pale staff, the stunned faces. Her voice carried one final time. "Make no mistake, the airline belongs, in part, to me, and the first correction has already begun." The silence that followed wasn't disbelief anymore. It was recognition. A recognition so deep it hummed through the walls and into the lives of the thousands already watching on screens. And with that, the balance of power shifted for good. The announcement came not from Eleanor's lips, but from the devices buzzing in every staff member's hands. Phones lit up, with directives stamped Priority 1. Laptops inside the lounge pinged simultaneously. A collective intake of breath swept the room as the first wave of orders hit. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply stood with her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, eyes steady as the dominoes began to fall. The lounge supervisor's phone buzzed again and again. He stared at the screen, his color draining. "Immediate suspension," he whispered, barely audible. His colleagues leaned over his shoulder, their own devices flashing the same line. "Effective now. Remove from duty pending review." The attendant who had barred Eleanor's entry fumbled her badge. Her hands shook as security approached, not with hostility, but with the cool inevitability of procedure. The sight of her being quietly escorted away sent a shiver through the crowd. Passengers shifted uneasily. They weren't watching an argument anymore. They were watching authority being dismantled in real time. Eleanor remained composed, her voice even when she finally spoke. Every system answers to accountability. If it fails, it resets. That's what you are witnessing. A manager from another gate hurried forward, confused. "Ma'am, what is going on? We're receiving directives we've never seen before." Eleanor met his gaze calmly. "Compliance, nothing more." Her phone buzzed once. She tapped the screen and read aloud without theatrics. Diversity and conduct training modules activated. All frontline staff must complete within 30 days. Mandatory. She lowered the phone. "That begins tonight." Across the concourse, other employees glanced at their devices, disbelief etched on their faces. One muttered, "They're rewriting policy while we stand here." A man in a business suit laughed once, shaking his head. "Not rewriting. Replacing. She's tearing down the old script." Indeed, the changes rolled out like falling dominoes. Automatic emails hit inboxes across the airline network. Anonymous reporting line live. Hotline staffed 24/7. Screens in back offices updated with new compliance metrics. Every piece of the corporate machine shifted course. The effect was immediate. The staff who had once stood tall now looked small, diminished by the weight of their own undone authority. Eleanor clasped her hands in front of her. This isn't revenge. It's a correction. No single passenger should depend on wealth or recognition to be treated with dignity. The system must guarantee it. The crowd erupted in murmurs. A woman with a stroller whispered, "She's changing an airline policy in front of us." Another said, "No, in front of the world." The airport manager finally spoke, voice low, almost reverent. "You've already reset everything." Eleanor inclined her head slightly. "Only the beginning." Phones buzzed again. This time, the message was simple. Directive acknowledged. System reset complete. The hush that followed felt historic. The company wasn't promising change tomorrow. It was obeying orders now. Eleanor looked across the faces gathered in the concourse. She saw awe, fear, relief, disbelief, but above all, recognition. They understood. Power had shifted. Permanently. The conference room was meant for flight schedules and quarterly updates, not a crisis. Yet within an hour, it had filled with executives, legal advisors, and nervous managers. The airline's logo glowed faintly on the wall, but every eye in the room stayed locked on the large screen where Eleanor Brooks appeared, calm as ever, standing in the terminal with passengers still gathered behind her. Her tone was steady, but it carried the weight of command. This is no longer a question of one employee's behavior. This is systemic, and systems demand reform. The chairwoman of the board cleared her throat, her face tight. "Dr. Brooks, we acknowledge mistakes were made, but immediate reform this fast will be difficult." Eleanor didn't blink. "You reorganize entire flight schedules in 6 hours when weather shuts down half the country. Don't tell me reform is slower than a storm." The line cut through the air. Several executives shifted, chastened. On the table before them, documents appeared via secure email. New training protocols, compliance reporting forms, a timeline that began not next month but tonight. "You will implement mandatory bias training within 30 days, Eleanor said. "An independent hotline is already activated for discrimination reports. All complaints will be reviewed by a third-party firm, not buried in your internal files. Transparency begins now." One legal officer whispered urgently, "This is too much exposure if we admit fault publicly." Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "You've already been exposed. Thousands are watching live. Your stock has already shifted. You can either embrace transparency or drown in denial." Choose wisely. The chairwoman hesitated, then nodded slowly. Approved. The speed stunned even the executives in the room. They had come expecting negotiation. Instead, they were handed marching orders. Back in the concourse, a passenger whispered, "She's forcing an airline to change policies in real time." Another answered, "Not forcing. Leading." Eleanor folded her notebook shut with quiet finality. Emergency reform isn't about preserving your image. It's about protecting every traveler who steps onto your planes. That begins here. That begins tonight. And in that instant, the crisis room ceased to belong to the airline. It belonged to her. By dawn the next morning, the headlines had already spread. News anchors leaned into their cameras, voices urgent with disbelief. Denied entry to the lounge, then revealed as the largest shareholder of the airline. The footage replayed endlessly. Eleanor Brooks, shawl over her shoulders, speaking calmly as staff fumbled and phones lit up with directives. Cable panels dissected every second. Commentators shook their heads. "This wasn't just humiliation reversed," one said. "This was a power shift broadcast live. In New York, a group of law students passed a phone around between classes. She made them change policy on the spot." Imagine if we could do that. With hospitals, with universities. Their professor overheard and smiled faintly. "You're witnessing institutional reform, students. This is case law before the case is even filed." Airline competitors scrambled to respond. Delta announced bias training modules within 24 hours. United leaked news of a planned equity task force. Greyhound bus lines quietly confirmed they were contracting a diversity officer. No one wanted to be the next headline. At the Atlanta airport itself, passengers felt the shift immediately. A woman traveling with her elderly mother was waved through the priority lane with warmth she hadn't felt before. A black businessman whispered into his phone, "They're looking at me differently today." It's not pity, it's caution. Like they know someone's watching. On social media, the footage of Eleanor's line, "Beginning today, I am the one who gives orders here," was clipped, shared, and memed into 1,000 formats. But beneath the memes lay something deeper. Ordinary travelers sharing their own stories. Posts poured in about being sidelined, doubted, humiliated. And now, for the first time, those stories were being heard. At Brooks Capital's Chicago headquarters, Eleanor reviewed reports with her staff. Charts glowed on the wall, stock fluctuations, media mentions, policy rollouts from rival companies. She nodded once. "The effect is already spreading." "Good. Let them feel the tremor." Her assistant leaned forward. "Dr. Brooks, what do we call this?" Eleanor tapped her pen against the notebook. Her voice was quiet, almost reflective. "A ripple effect. One disruption becomes 10. 10 become 100. And before long, the system is unrecognizable." The assistant smiled. "History will call it something else, ma'am. They'll call it a turning point." A year later, the story of Eleanor Brooks had become more than a viral headline. It had hardened into history. At the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, the auditorium swelled with nearly 1,000 guests. Airline executives, lawmakers, students, and elders filled the seats. The air was reverent, electric. And at the center of the stage stood Eleanor, silver hair gleaming under the lights, the same shawl folded across her shoulders like a banner. She spoke without notes. She didn't need them. "What began as a denial at a lounge door," she said, her voice carrying steady through the hall, "has become a movement for accountability, not just in airlines, but across every industry where bias hides behind policy." On the screen behind her glowed charts. Discrimination complaints dropping by 60%. Industry-wide. New hotlines opened. Training programs expanded. Each number represented not just reform, but lives changed. Travelers walking into spaces without fear of dismissal. The crowd leaned forward as she continued, This was never about one seat in a lounge. It was about who gets told they don't belong, and whether we choose to accept that answer. If you noted to stage, in the front row, a young woman wiped her eyes. She had once written Eleanor a letter about being humiliated on a train. Now she worked as a policy analyst, pushing reforms at the Department of Transportation. Eleanor glanced toward her, a small smile acknowledging the ripple that had become a wave. Executives who had once resisted now applauded, understanding the cost of silence. A senator leaned to a colleague. She didn't just change a company, she changed the playbook for justice. When Eleanor concluded, she left the audience with words that would be quoted for years. Legacy isn't money. Legacy is systems that outlive us. And I intend for this legacy to guarantee dignity, not for the privileged few, but for every traveler who steps across a boarding gate. The ovation rose to its feet. Phones lifted, capturing not just a speech, but a milestone. Eleanor lowered her head briefly, then lifted it again, her expression calm, resolute. She hadn't set out to become a symbol, but by refusing to be dismissed, she had become one anyway. And the legacy was secured. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of Eleanor Brooks's story. When I think about what happened in that airport lounge, I don't just hear the sting of one woman being told she didn't belong. I hear the echo of all the times people of color, especially women, have been underestimated, ignored, or dismissed. And yet, Eleanor showed us something remarkable. Dignity and strategy are stronger than arrogance. Her calm refusal to accept humiliation became the spark that forced an entire system to change. This story is not just about first-class tickets, polished lounges, or corporate stock. It's about power reclaimed. It reminds us that even when society tries to shrink us, we can rise taller than the walls built to exclude us. Eleanor did not fight for a chair in that room. She bought the whole building. That's the kind of transformation we should carry with us in our own lives. If Eleanor's journey inspired you, I'd love for you to stay connected with us. Share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video. Tell someone you care about what you just heard. And most of all, subscribe to the channel. Because every story here is a reminder you belong too.